There's a moment in sports that doesn't happen often, the kind where everything stops, where time slows down just enough for the world to realize it's watching something it's never seen before. This was one of those moments. Center court at Wimbledon, the most sacred patch of grass in all of tennis, packed wall to wall with 25,000 people who hadn't come from London or Paris or New York. They had come from Manila. They had come from Cebu, from Davao, from tiny provinces whose names most of the world couldn't place on a map. They had crossed oceans, burned through savings, booked flights months in advance, all for one reason: to watch a 21-year-old girl from the Philippines walk out onto that court and do something that no Filipino had ever done before in the open era of Grand Slam tennis. And up in the royal box, surrounded by dignitaries and royals and the most celebrated names in British society, sat Sir David Beckham, freshly knighted, impossibly composed, leaning forward in his chair with the kind of focus you rarely see on a man who has already witnessed everything sports has to offer. And what happened next, what he said when the cameras caught him and when the microphone finally reached him after the match, sent shockwaves through the tennis world that nobody saw coming. Because this wasn't a celebrity waving from the stands. This wasn't a famous face enjoying a day out at a prestigious event. This was a man who had spent 20 years carrying a nation on his back, who had felt the weight of 50 million English hopes pressing down on his shoulders every time he stepped onto a pitch, looking at a young woman and recognizing something in her that he recognized in himself. And when he spoke about it, the world stopped and listened. To understand why that moment hit so hard, you have to understand what the royal box actually is, because people throw the term around casually without realizing how extraordinary it is to sit there. The royal box at Wimbledon isn't just a fancy section of premium seats. It's a curated space where the All England Club places the people it considers to have shaped the world in some meaningful way. Royalty, yes, but also prime ministers, cultural icons, legends of sport and art and science. You don't buy your way into that box. You get invited. And the invitation itself is a statement, a recognition that your life has meant something beyond the ordinary. Beckham had been in that box before, but this year felt different from the moment he arrived. The energy around the grounds was unlike anything Wimbledon had experienced in its long and storied history. Usually the tournament carries a particular kind of atmosphere: civilized, appreciative, deeply English. There's a reverence to it, a quietness even in the applause, as though the crowd understands that this place demands a certain decorum. But on this particular Tuesday, that atmosphere had been completely overwhelmed by something louder and more colorful and more emotionally raw than Wimbledon had ever hosted. Philippine flags were everywhere. Not scattered here and there among the crowd, but everywhere. A sea of blue, red, white, and gold rippling across the stands in every direction you looked. And the noise was something else entirely. When Alex Eala's name was announced over the public address system, the sound that erupted from those stands was the kind of sound that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand straight up. It wasn't polite applause. It wasn't even enthusiastic applause. It was a roar, deep and sustained and full of something that went far beyond appreciation for tennis. It was the sound of an entire country that had waited its whole life for this moment finally being given permission to let it all out. Beckham heard it before he saw her. He told people afterward that it was the noise that made him sit up and pay attention, because in 20 years of playing football at the highest level, World Cups, Champions League finals, sold-out stadiums on 4 continents, he had developed a kind of internal compass for crowd sound. He could tell the difference between a crowd that was excited and a crowd that was genuinely moved. And what he was hearing in those opening minutes was a crowd that was genuinely moved. These weren't tourists watching a tennis match. These were people who had traveled halfway around the world because a girl from their country had given them a reason to believe in something. And then he saw her come through the tunnel and walk out onto center court, and everything he thought he understood about what he was watching shifted instantly. She was 21 years old. Left-handed, moving across the grass with a looseness and a quiet confidence that experienced players spend careers trying to develop and most never quite achieve. She acknowledged the crowd the way a veteran acknowledges a crowd, not desperately, not nervously, but with a kind of composed gratitude that suggested she had already made peace with the magnitude of the moment before she ever set foot on the court. That's the thing that stopped Beckham. Not her backhand. Not her serve speed. Not any particular technical attribute that a tennis analyst might identify in a scouting report. It was the way she carried herself. Because Beckham had been 21 once, and he remembered what it had felt like to walk out in front of 70,000 people with the knowledge that an entire nation was watching. He remembered the way your legs could feel heavy with the weight of other people's dreams. He remembered how easy it was to let that weight crush you, to let the enormity of the expectation tighten your muscles and cloud your thinking and make you play like a shadow of yourself. And he remembered, with a clarity that only comes from hard experience, how rare it was to find a young athlete who had somehow figured out how to carry all of that without letting it show. What he was watching down on center court was one of those rare athletes. He leaned forward in his seat. The person sitting next to him noticed. And then the cameras noticed. And within minutes, the clip of Sir David Beckham, freshly knighted, global icon, one of the most recognizable human beings on the planet, leaning forward and whispering something about the young Filipina on the court. Below was circulating online, and the question that everyone was asking was the same. What did he say? The match itself was extraordinary in its own right, a showcase of everything that had made Eala the most talked-about player heading into the fortnight. Her movement was exceptional, the kind of fluid athleticism that looks effortless from the stands but requires years of relentless conditioning to produce. Her shot selection was mature beyond her years. She wasn't trying to win points with flash, she was constructing them methodically, building pressure point by point with the patience of someone twice her age. Every time the Filipino fans in the stands erupted between rallies, she would look up, find them, give them something, a small smile, a nod, a raised fist, and then turn back to the baseline and reset. That rhythmic connection between player and crowd, that ability to draw energy from the stands without being destabilized by it, is one of the most underrated skills in professional tennis. Most players have to work at it for years. Eala did it like she was breathing. Up in the royal box, Beckham watched all of this with the focused attention of someone conducting a private evaluation. He had seen talented players before. He had seen players with the physical gifts and the technical repertoire that made scouts salivate. What he was watching now was something rarer, a player who had figured out the mental side of the game at an age when most of her peers were still being overwhelmed by it. He thought about his own career, about the years it had taken him to learn how to manage the pressure of being the player everyone pointed to when England needed something. He thought about the criticism he had absorbed, the expectations he had carried, the nights when the weight of it all had felt almost impossible to bear. And he looked at this 21-year-old girl moving across the grass at Wimbledon, and he thought, she already knows how to do this. She already knows. When the match ended and the BBC reporter made his way through the corridors to find Beckham for a comment, the plan had probably been to get a quick soundbite about the tournament, the weather, whatever pleasantries were appropriate for the occasion. What he got instead was something nobody on his production team had anticipated. Beckham paused for a moment before he answered the first question, the way he always does when he's about to say something he actually means rather than something that's been managed and polished and approved by a PR team. Then he said that he had come to watch someone special, and that he hadn't been disappointed. The reporter followed the thread, and Beckham followed it right back. He said she was the real deal. He said he had seen talent, and he had seen hype, and he had seen young players who had everything they needed except the ability to handle the moment when the moment arrived. And then he said that Eala was different. He said you could see it in the way she carried herself. You could see it in the way she acknowledged the crowd without being consumed by it. You could see it in the fact that you couldn't read the pressure on her face, not because she wasn't feeling it, but because she had found a way to hold it without letting it leak into her game. And then he said the thing that made the tennis world go completely quiet. He said he knew what it was like to carry the weight of a nation, because he had done it himself for 20 years. He said he knew the loneliness of being the one player from your country standing at the top, the one person millions of people were watching and hoping wouldn't fail. And he said that watching Alex Eala do it at 21, on center court at Wimbledon, as the first Filipino in Grand Slam history to earn a single seed, was not just impressive. It was historic. The word hung there. Historic. From the mouth of a man who had been knighted by the King of England just days earlier. From the mouth of a man who had played in World Cup finals and Champions League nights and whose name was known in countries that didn't even have football pitches. That word, from that person, about this 21-year-old girl from the Philippines, landed like something much larger than a compliment. The reaction online was immediate and overwhelming in a way that even seasoned sports journalists struggled to fully describe afterward. The Filipino community, which had already shown the world what it looked like when a nation mobilized behind a single athlete, erupted with a joy that transcended sports entirely. Because what Beckham had said wasn't just praise for a tennis player. It was recognition. It was a man at the very summit of global sporting culture looking at their daughter, their sister, their hero, and saying, I see her. I know exactly what she is, and I'm telling you right now that she belongs. The tears that showed up in the comment sections of those viral clips weren't about tennis. They were about something much older and much deeper. The feeling that a country that had been overlooked for so long was finally being seen in the place where it mattered most. Former players who had watched Eala's rise with carefully maintained skepticism found themselves scrambling to reassess. The whisper network that exists in professional tennis, the one that separates genuine prospects from flash-in-the-pan stories, had been murmuring about her for months. But whispers are easy to dismiss. Sir David Beckham standing in the royal box at Wimbledon and calling you the real deal on live television is not easy to dismiss. Analysts who had been cautious about projecting her future suddenly had a much more complicated story to navigate. Because Beckham's endorsement wasn't just cultural currency, though it was certainly that. It was also the endorsement of someone who understood from personal experience what separated the players who could handle this level from the ones who eventually cracked under it. He wasn't talking about her forehand. He was talking about her character. And character, as every serious student of sport knows, is the variable that determines everything in the long run. What made the whole sequence of events even more remarkable was Eala's own response to it. When the post-match press conference brought the inevitable question, what did she think about Sir David Beckham's comments about the global icon in the royal box who had just told the world she was special? She didn't light up with the kind of visible delight you might expect from a 21-year-old being publicly praised by one of the most famous athletes in human history. She nodded. She smiled, quietly. And she said it was an honor, but that she wasn't there for the praise. She was there to represent her country, and she wasn't done yet. That was it. No gushing. No performing. No riding the wave of the moment for an extra 30 seconds of joy. Just a clean, grounded, completely unsentimental acknowledgement of the compliment followed immediately by a redirect to the work still ahead. And if there was any doubt remaining in the minds of the people in that press conference room about whether Beckham had seen something real in her, that response erased it completely. Because what he had said about her, that she carried herself with a maturity you couldn't teach, that she processed pressure in a way that most athletes spent careers trying to learn, was exactly what she had just demonstrated in front of the international media. She was 21 years old and she had just been publicly endorsed by Sir David Beckham at Wimbledon, and her response was to say, "Thank you, I have more work to do." That's not something you coach. That's something you're born with. The story kept growing over the following hours and days, fed by the kind of momentum that only comes when a sporting moment catches something larger than sport in its net. Journalists who covered tennis were fielding calls from colleagues who covered culture and politics and international affairs, all of them trying to understand what exactly was happening on those grass courts. Commentators talked about the Eala effect, a phrase that had been circulating for months already, with a new seriousness, no longer framing it as a charming curiosity but as a genuine cultural phenomenon with implications that extended well beyond the scoreboard. The flags in the stands, the flights from Manila, the watching millions back home, the tears in the comment sections, the knighted footballer leaning forward in the royal box, all of it was pointing toward the same thing. Something was happening here. Something real and significant and worth paying attention to, not just as a sports story but as a human story. Because at its core, that's what this was. It was a story about a young woman from a country that had never had this particular dream validated, going to the oldest and most prestigious tennis tournament in the world and making the whole world look up. It was about the particular loneliness of being the first Filipino to earn a single seed at a Grand Slam, the first to bring 25,000 of her own people pouring into the stands at Wimbledon, the first to stand under those lights and carry that specific weight. And it was about a man who had been one of the firsts in his own way, who had understood that particular loneliness from the inside, watching her from the royal box and feeling compelled to tell the world what he saw. There's a version of this story where it stays inside the tennis bubble, where it gets treated as an interesting cultural footnote and then absorbed into the tournament's history and forgotten. But that's not the version that happened. The version that happened was that Sir David Beckham sat in the royal box at Wimbledon in the summer of 2026 and told the world that Alex Eala reminded him of himself. And once those words were out there, once a man of that stature had drawn that specific parallel, the conversation changed permanently. Not just around Eala, but around what was possible. Around what it meant for a country like the Philippines to have a player like this. Around what it looked like when a 21-year-old refused to be small just because no one from her country had been big in this particular arena before. The applause from the royal box echoed around the world. But what was waiting for Alex Eala on those courts in the days ahead was louder than any applause, heavier than any endorsement, and more meaningful than any words from any icon. She had a match to win. She had a country to carry. And if what Beckham saw in her was what it looked like from the outside, she was ready for all of it.